People have had a lot of opinions expressed about iconic crystals, and yesterday I promised you I would dig into the details, looking at the math to actually understand where is actually the best place to put your iconic crystals. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a couple things. First of all, why is it that the developers even put an iconic crystal system into the game? I will make a few guesses, and then I will get right into the math of which of these things truly is the best one to put your iconic crystals on, and how much of an effect does it even really have. Now, before I begin, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video, War and Order. This is War and Order, a city building and equipment collecting game where you go and smash other players with your alliance. And in fact, just last week we started playing this game and we've got 3 alliances running right now. So if you want to try out War and Order, the link will be in the description, and you can start playing with the Smash Squad. And yes, we have so many alliances. We actually have places for new players. And there are a number of things that I am enjoying about this game so far. First of all, city building is fun. There are a number of buildings and technologies that you upgrade in order to make your troops that do battle more effective in combat. And of course, you are recruiting troops. I'm a fan, personally, of the orcs, but you've also got some cavalry. Oh, I mean, frigging cavalry riding a velociraptor is hard to argue with. I guess they call it a dragon rider, but I'm calling it a velociraptor rider. I'm going with that, man. Archers and, of course, mages, but, you know, obviously, the most badass of them all is these orcs over here. And in addition to the troops that you collect, there's also equipment and other things like emblems that enhance your stats using your materials in ways that make you more powerful. So if you want to play with us and see what this is all about, you have no obligation, of course, to continue playing for the rest of time, but we'll be playing for a while in server 1492. Link is in the description. Join us, play with the Smash Squad, check it out. Let's start by answering a very important question. Why is it that the developers even put iconic crystals into the game? It's not like they're selling them to us. I think there is something very important we need to talk about, and that has to do with equipment itself. You see, for a lot of equipment, for example, let's get a look at some boots over here. These epic boots, if I make these flame treads and I talent them, I am going to get 7.5% of infantry defense in total, which, by the way, looks awfully similar to the legendary set boots. So I think what the developers are doing by virtue of adding iconic crystals and iconic equipment into the game is giving you a little more incentive to actually go the mile of investing a major amount of materials into this legendary equipment. That's my hypothesis. Now, also it costs gold, which, like, rip my gold, man. That's a separate matter entirely that maybe I don't want to get into. I need more gold to do all the things that I want to do, but that just is what it is. I'd love to see reduced healing costs. So that's my theory as to why the developers added iconic crystals. This is just my theory. I am just guessing that it is to make it so that legendary equipment holds more weight, and talented legendary equipment holds even more weight further. Now, this obviously opens up a little bit of a gap between the people who have special talent legendaries and have legendaries at all, and those who do not. But how much of a gap is it? To figure this out, I wanted to get a look at some of the math and really dive in. And thanks to Ruz and Cortex, they sent me this really insightful Reddit post. I really am long overdue for some sort of Reddit review here, but hey, here we are, and a huge thank you to Fair Isadi, who made this post yesterday with all of the math that I think you would want to know about how the iconic crystals actually work, and proving to you which of these things actually has the biggest benefit. And by the way, before I go over the math itself, allow me to express my concern with looking at math and theory, or even, like, I know it's like, even if it's exactly how the game formulas work, my reservation here is that I want to see full commanders, like meta commanders, fully geared, fighting full troop amounts till one march sad faces, and run that like 10 or 20 times. And then and only then, when we observe how it's actually working in game, will I start to feel more confident to verify that everything works the way it does. But the math here does look sound, and you can verify some of this in game, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. So I'm going to read through this post, and again, it's very well written. Big thank you to the author here. Because of the update with iconic equipment, I have done some digging into the base stats and how they interact with troop buffs from any source to determine what are the best items to give iconic buffs. So let's first go to the base stats. The base stats of all units are set. Now, they've got this here as if you have no civilization. Keep in mind, you have a civilization, and one of your units will be the special unit, which has higher base stats. That's one of the many reasons why your civilization choice is relevant, and one of the many reasons why, for a time, I was heavily advocating that you go all in on one troop type. Now, I no longer advocate that in the same way because the commanders are just too powerful to ignore for every single troop type now, so I think it's worth having, at most, 3 of any one troop type to take advantage of the extra base stats that you get from your special unit. So in this instance, they are giving an example of the Ottoman Empire, or civilization, and they have the Janissary. The Janissary has some elevated base stats here, +7 base attack and +4 base health. That is base, that is different from the civilization's 5% health boost for all archers. That is a separate buff. We're going to account for that in just a second. So if we scroll down through their post here, he says, now let's get a look at the troop building. I select my T5 Janissary, and I press on the information button, and here it shows me my stats. 227, 216, 216, which we were just talking about. But it also shows a number in green behind those base stats. In my case, +222, +211, +138. Now, let me show you this in game. Here you can get a look at my special, non-special archer unit here, which you can see the base stats, 220, 216, 212, and these numbers in green. 226, 211, 120. Where do those numbers in green come from? And the post will go on to explain, and I'll read this in just a second, that those numbers actually come from your city. If you go not to your city theme, but instead the stats section, you look at the military buffs. As an example, you can see I have 103% infantry attack, or 103% archer attack. So if you go in to your archers over here, we look at the info button, you can see that the archer attack over here of 103% is accounted for. They do that by taking the number on the left in white and multiplying by that buff that you have listed in your city. So 220 by 103%, that's the boost you get over here, 226, and it looks like they have rounded down. Keep me honest, but this feels like, if it's not exactly correct, it's close enough for the purpose of our conversation today. This, of course, is something that we could repeat if we wanted. We could look at archer health, which is 212 over here. If we look at the health boost I have for archers, we can see all the way down here, archer health is 57%. Obviously, it's much lower. So if we go get a look at these archers over here and their stats, we multiply 212 by 0.57, we should get that number we see, the 120. Yes, I get 120.84, and I guess they're rounding down somewhere there. The conclusion of the author here is that the strength of a troop is its base stats, which are multiplied by the buffs it receives through a variety of sources. And this is where we need to dig in a little bit further, because there are conditional buffs in the game, things that will not show up in that City Hall view and in that green number yet, because it's conditional. So, for example, they show a number of things in their list here. That includes talents, gear, skills, a lot of things that are commander specific, obviously can't show up in your City Hall, where it's telling you your buffs for everything. Now, they point out very intelligently here that this means the actual strength of a troop is higher than the numbers shown in the troop training building. But by applying the same principles of the strength of a troop equals the base stats plus their base stats times the buffs received, we can still figure out exactly how good bonus base stats are. So they go on to do this for their troops by looking at an actual battle report to see what is in the battle report. Now, I will point out that looking at a battle report is also still a flawed approach, because even in the battle report itself, it will not show conditional buffs still. It will show your equipment, it'll show your talents. Some of the things that were not represented in your City Hall will be represented in the battle report stats, but will only show up in the turn-by-turn review. For example, Nevsky has a chance when he's hit of giving 30% health. Well, that's not going to show up in the overall stat review because it's conditional. So once again, some of the factors we can account for, but others we cannot because they are conditional based on what's happening in the battle. Another great example of a buff that works that way would be one that says if you have only one troop type represented, then you get extra stats. That will never show up in the full list of stats because that's considered to be conditional still. The author goes on to talk about some realistic KVK stats. Now, I will argue a whale will have more stats. And if we wanted to get a look at some whale stats, why don't we get a look at the battle report from Fat Hands, which for a time, this rally that we launched in Kingdom 254, battling against Kingdom 556, was one of the highest damage rally reports. I mean, technically, it still is probably one of the top 5 high damage rally reports in all of Rise of Kingdoms history. And by the way, card will be up in the top if you want to watch that full video about that rally. Now, these are some stats that you might expect to see. They still don't account for conditional things like Nevsky's procced health. However, for a whaled account with max technology, you're looking at 232 attack, 173 defense, and 134.5% health. I don't know what buffs he had at the exact moment where it snapshotted this information, if he had a kingdom title like the King, or if he had, well, he wouldn't have had King. He might have had General in this instance. He might have had a rune running. I know he's got a great city theme, which would be accounted for in these stats. So I think these would be some really good stats to use for this calculation. And the ratio of stats is a little bit off, but still similar-ish to that 2, 1.5, 1 ratio presented by the author. Let me show you. The author goes on here to do this math where they evaluate how good is it with that 200, 150, 100 of attack, defense, health. How good is it to add 6 base stats to each stat? And what you get out of that equation is an extra 18 attack, 15 defense, and 12 health. The amount you would get is actually going to be higher for a rally lead like you saw, like Fat Hands in that picture, because they had more percent multipliers. It also will be higher based off of the buffs that your rally or garrison or march is getting. And at times it will be, I guess, lower based off of some debuffs and how those work, perhaps. But for the final conclusion, we see that in this example, attack gets the biggest increase in attack power, defense gets the second biggest, and health gets the smallest. And it's easy to understand why. It's just because the percent multiplier is lower for health. But with that said, that only accounts for the stats of the troops and their attack and defense and health. It doesn't account for what happens once you actually fight another player. So increasing your base stats gives you a nice benefit to that green number and the white number because of the way that the multipliers work, but also you have to account for combat itself. Now, combat itself is a somewhat complicated separate matter to go and talk about, but suffice to say, I have proven in a number of videos that increasing your health multipliers is better than increasing your defense multipliers, which is better than increasing your attack modifiers, typically because of the distribution of stats on your commanders and the nature of some amount of diminishing returns. However, they arrive at this conclusion here. What does this mean? It means that no matter which stat you boost through iconic improvement of gear, the net effect is very close to each other in most situations in KVK. In extreme cases, for example, extremely high attack, it is better to boost attack base stats with iconic because the net effect is bigger. So the TLDR of this really well-written post is that honestly, like, yeah, you'll make some initial investments and like maybe some initial investments in attack will be better than initial investments in other things, especially if you're maxing out your KVK technology. But for the most part, in the not too distant future, presumably, the people that are leading rallies and garrisons will have mostly full iconic sets. And like, it'll all be even for both the rally and the garrison in that regard. However, if you're looking at this for the first time and you're new to the game and you're figuring out what the heck should I put these on? I will reiterate my priorities from the previous video, where I suggested the following. First and foremost, because accessories buff health for all troop types, let me show you. If you ever wanted to change what commander pairing you cared about the most, the advantage of starting with your accessories is, again, that all troop types means you can switch it to another commander and still get a ton of benefit. I personally think that's the way to go, and money where my mouth is. I started with 2 accessories, now iconic. I've got the Ring of Doom and also the Horn of Fury, and yes, I know for Canyon purposes, I have the lucky coin on my Guan instead of actually using the procced Ring of Doom. You're just going to trust me that the coin is actually really good on Guan and Canyon in the front row. Anyways, the next priority, I think, ought to be weapons. And then from there, as I said yesterday, if you're doing cavalry, because the cavalry sets have so much health, after weapons, you would prioritize health then defense. And in most situations, I think after doing attack, then you do defense, and then you do health. That will be true for infantry and probably archers. It will depend, I suppose, a little bit more on exactly which commanders you're using, because commanders give buffs to different things. But all of that, I think, is overthinking the fact that, in general, the iconics are really strong. It seems that developers have probably added them to the game to make it so that legendaries are more differentiated from epics. And as I knock my microphone here, it's essentially made it so that sets like this one become more important to upgrade from so that you can get the benefit of the iconic boosts. But rather than dump a ton of iconic crystals into the system all at once, such that honestly players like me would run around with literally every march fully iconic, they're doing it slowly, and they're making it so you can't buy it, so that over time, people have more of an opportunity to catch up, rather than flooding the ecosystem, then making the strongest players very strong relative to everyone else in terms of the value of that enhancement at this sort of exact moment in time. So all that to say, pick your accessories first, in my opinion, but the difference is so small that it almost honestly doesn't even matter. If you enjoyed this video, throw a like on here and consider subscribing. If you have something opposing in your viewpoint or understanding of all of that you want to share, definitely I want to know about that in the comments if you feel really strongly, like one way or another. And the last thing I'll just say with regard to talented equipment versus not talented equipment, yes, you do get a little bit of extra base stat by virtue of putting it on something talented. You could make an argument that if you have armor that is talented and accessories that are not, that you might start on the armor. The only downside there is that you better care about that troop type a lot, because, you know, I have an infantry account on my restart. I could do my talented boots on my restart, but if I start to care about calves more, GG. GG, and if I had done accessories, which is what I did do, that's easy to transfer. So, until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.